Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're going deep on a philosopher who, honestly, I think deserves a lot more attention than he usually gets, Pierre Bayle.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
He was sharp. Even Leibniz, the Leibniz considered Bayle an intellectual equal.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, you look at Bayle's historical and critical dictionary.
Oh, yeah.
It's an amazing work.
It's huge.
Huge, yeah, 6 million words.
6 million.
And I think we see its influence on later Enlightenment thinkers like Hume.
Okay, so 6 million words, that's a lot of words.
That's a lot of words.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Bayle is kind of known for what scholars call the Bayle enigma. It's the mystery surrounding his actual beliefs, his intentions.
Yeah, you read Bayle and you wonder, is this guy a skeptic? Is he an atheist? Is he a devout Christian? It's hard to tell.
Yeah, you could read him in all those ways.
Yeah.
So today, I'm hoping we can kind of shed some light on this enigma, explore some of his key ideas on atheism, freedom of conscience, and the problem of evil.
Sounds good.
Let's dive in. So one of the things that really struck me was Bayle's argument that a society of atheists could actually be potentially more morally sound than a religious one.
Okay.
Now, this comes from his various thoughts on the occasion of a comet, which, if you haven't read it, it's a wild ride.
Yeah, it's a fascinating text.
To a 17th century audience, this must have been just a shocking statement.
Right. I mean, this is really challenging the assumption that you need religion for morality.
Right, exactly. It's like it's turning everything on its head.
And he argues that, comets were signs of divine judgment, which was the common view at the time. But if that were the case, then all the different ways that people were interpreting these comets would have to come from God.
Right.
Right? Like God would be the author of all these misunderstandings and the conflicts that followed from them.
Oh, that's so interesting. He's turning this whole idea of comets and divine judgment kind of back on itself.
Right. And so for Bayle, morality really comes down to temperament and upbringing, not necessarily religious belief.
Huh.
And he brings up these historical examples of virtuous atheists like Diagoras or the tragically executed Lucilio Vanini.
I love how he uses these historical figures to just kind of throw a wrench in the works,
Right. It's like, here's your assumptions about atheists and morality. Look at these
And
examples.
it's almost like he's trying to provoke people.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, for sure.
Yeah, and it works. And this leads us to, I think, another one of Bayle's really groundbreaking ideas,
Yeah.
his defense of freedom of conscience.
Right.
He believed that, you have this right to believe what appears to be true to you,
Yeah.
even if it ends up contradicting what religious authorities might say is objective truth.
And this idea of objective truth is really interesting, right? Because for Bayle, conscience works on two levels. First, you have these innate moral truths.
Okay.
And then you have the practical judgments that we make based on those truths.
So wait, even if someone's belief is like factually wrong, they still have the right to hold that belief if that's what their conscience is telling them.
Yeah.
That seems, for the time, that's incredibly progressive.
It is, yeah. Bayle was very much in favor of, individual autonomy and intellectual freedom.
And he illustrates this whole idea with a really, really interesting analogy.
Oh, yeah, the master and the servant analogy.
Yes. Can you just walk us through that one?
Sure. So imagine you have a master, right? And he leaves his servant in charge of the house.
Okay.
He tells the servant, only let people in with this particular certificate.
Okay.
But then what if the master's son shows up without the certificate? Or a bandit comes with a forged certificate?
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, so the servant, he's bound by his instructions, even if, it leads to something that he knows isn't right.
So the servant kind of, in a way, represents our conscience.
Yeah.
And we're bound to follow our own judgment, even if it's wrong.
Right. And in this analogy, God's kind of like the absent master.
Okay.
He's the one who gives us the right, but also the duty to use our own judgment.
That's a really powerful analogy.
And it's really helpful for understanding Bayle's view, right? Because it shows how even if someone's belief is quote unquote wrong, as long as it's based on their genuine understanding of truth, they have the right to believe it.
And this extends, of course, to religious belief as well, right? Bayle was a big advocate for religious toleration.
Oh, absolutely.
He even challenged the traditional interpretation of that passage in Luke 14.23.
Yeah, compel them to enter.
Which was often used to justify persecution. He was really going head-to-head with some pretty powerful ideas.
He was, and his argument there is that forcing someone to convert actually goes against the very heart of Christianity,
Yeah.
which is supposed to be about love and understanding.
So not only is it morally wrong, it's almost counterproductive.
Exactly, because for Bayle, genuine belief can only come from genuine acceptance and understanding.
And not from coercion.
Not from being forced into it.
So Bayle's saying persecution is both wrong and ineffective.
Yeah, and he takes this even further with arguments that sound a lot like what Kant would later say.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Bayle says that persecution actually creates these moral contradictions and hypocrisy within Christianity itself.
Okay. I'm really intrigued now. But before we get into like the proto-Kantian argument, I think we should maybe take a step back and look at this other fascinating aspect of Bayle's thought, his relationship with skepticism.
Okay. Yeah, that's crucial for understanding him. Yeah, so, Bayle never actually called himself a skeptic, right?
But his writing, it often has this kind of skeptical feel to it,
Like a skeptical bent.
Yeah, and he was really critical of anyone claiming to have absolute certainty, especially when it came to, religious dogma.
So it's almost like he's advocating for sort of like intellectual humility, like recognizing the limits of what we can actually know.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, he was incredibly erudite, incredibly learned.
Right.
But he also recognized that human reason has these inherent limits.
Right.
And he wasn't afraid to use those limits to challenge the dominant philosophical and theological systems of his day.
And this is where his article on Pyrrho from the dictionary comes in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be where his skepticism is most on display.
Right, yeah. So in that article, Bayle uses Christian doctrines, like the Trinity, to question the very idea of evidence as the ultimate criteria for truth.
Whoa, okay, unpack that for me a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's essentially saying that if you can accept these certain religious claims, which many people do,
Right.
then you basically have to abandon the idea that evidence always equals truth.
So he's saying, if you can accept, this religious claim which defies logic and reason, how can you be certain that anything you think is evident is actually true?
Right. It's this really thought-provoking argument that makes us think about the relationship between faith and reason, and how we can know anything for sure.
Right. And this is where I get tripped up because he also argues in other works that evidence can be a reliable guide to truth.
Yeah.
So he wasn't a total skeptic.
Right. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
I think in works like his Dialogues of Maximus and Themistius, he takes this more nuanced position where he says evidence can be useful, but it's not infallible.
Okay. So maybe it's more accurate to say that he was just really aware of the limits of human knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Like a need for intellectual humility rather than saying he's a full-blown skeptic.
I think that's a good way to sum it up.
Yeah.
And this awareness of human limitations, it leads us to maybe Bayle's most famous and most controversial contribution to philosophy,
Which is
the problem of evil.
Ah, right. That age-old question of how can a benevolent God who's all-powerful exist alongside suffering and evil in the world?
Right. And this was a huge theme in Bayle's work. And his take on it was pretty pessimistic. He argued that there's really no rational solution to this problem.
Oh, wow.
Like, no matter how much we try to reconcile the existence of a perfect God with the fact that there's suffering and evil in the world, we're going to run into contradictions.
So he's essentially saying any attempt to explain away evil, whether it's free will or suffering being part of some divine plan, is always going to fall short.
Exactly. He was ruthless in taking apart these traditional theodicies, these attempts to justify God in the face of evil.
And this got him in a lot of trouble, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because he's essentially accusing God of being responsible for evil.
Yeah, and his views on this were seen as very, very heretical by many.
Of course.
But Bayle was really firm in his belief that reason alone couldn't solve this fundamental dilemma.
So what did he offer as like an alternative?
So he argued that we have to accept certain core principles, like the existence of a perfect God on faith, even though we can't fully reconcile those principles with the reality of evil.
So he's almost saying faith requires us to just accept things we can't fully understand.
Yeah, it's a kind of acceptance, like willingness to embrace mystery, even when reason can't fully grasp it.
Right.
And this is where critics like Leclerc come in and they accuse Bayle of promoting blind faith,
Ah,
of basically giving up on reason.
right.
And Bayle's response is really interesting.
Okay.
He says, well, there are lots of areas of human knowledge where we have to accept things we can't fully explain. And he uses this example of the continuum, this idea of, the infinite divisibility of space,
Oh.
which, leads to all sorts of kind of mind-bending paradoxes.
Yeah, so he's comparing this problem of evil to something like the continuum,
Right.
where we hit these points where logic breaks down, and we just kind of have to accept the mystery of it.
Yeah, he's basically saying that the problem of evil isn't a problem for faith, it's a problem for reason.
Yeah.
And that accepting this unsolvable dilemma is actually a sign of intellectual honesty.
Oh, so this brings us right back to the Bayle enigma, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is he this devout Christian who's struggling with faith and reason, or is he hinting at something else?
It's the question that everyone wants to answer about Bayle.
Right.
Is he a skeptic? Is he a fideist? Is he some kind of closet atheist? There are good arguments for all these different interpretations.
Right, and I think that's part of what makes him so interesting, is that we can't quite pin him down.
Yeah, his work is complex, and it's often deliberately ambiguous,
He's slippery.
Yeah.
But before we get too bogged down in the enigma of Bayle's personal beliefs,
Right.
I think it'd be good to maybe focus on something that's that's particularly relevant to our listeners. Bayle's ideas about the nature of belief itself.
Yeah, because I think his work, even with all of its complexities and ambiguities, it still has a lot to teach us about how we form beliefs.
Exactly. I mean, it's not just some abstract philosophical exercise. It's grappling with something that I think anyone who's ever thought about the big questions in life has probably wrestled with.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating about Bayle is that he goes beyond just, arguing for the legal right to believe whatever you want.
Right.
He really gets into this relationship between individual judgment, conscience, and the pursuit of truth.
So it's not just about having the freedom to believe anything, but also the responsibility that comes with forming our own beliefs.
That's exactly right. And Bayle was really a champion of critical thinking.
Right.
He believed that real belief had to be based on careful examination and sincere conviction, not just on blindly accepting authority or dogma.
That's pretty radical for the time. I mean, considering how powerful religious institutions were.
Absolutely. He's basically saying that each individual has the capacity and even the duty to figure out what's true for themselves.
Yeah, and this ties right back into the Bayle enigma, right?
Right.
I mean, because we can't definitively say what Bayle himself believed.
Right.
We're kind of forced to engage with all these different interpretations of his work and maybe confront our own biases in the process.
Yeah, and it's almost like he's inviting us to join the debate, right? To wrestle with these tough questions alongside him.
Yeah.
He doesn't just give us easy answers. He makes us think critically and independently.
Which, at the end of the day, is what philosophy is all about.
Exactly. Bayle's work, I think, is a real testament to the power of philosophical inquiry. And, he might not have had all the answers,
Right.
but he sure knew how to ask the right questions that are still relevant today.
And that's what I love about exploring his work. You don't just come away with, facts about some dead philosopher.
Right.
You come away with, a whole new set of questions to think about.
Yeah.
New ways of thinking about belief and conscience and the limitations of human reason.
Yeah, he reminds us that philosophy isn't just about finding the right answer.
Right.
It's about this ongoing process of questioning and exploring and challenging our own assumptions.
So what does all this mean for us today? What can we take away from this deep dive into Pierre Bayle?
I think Bayle's legacy is this call to intellectual engagement.
Okay.
He's encouraging us to be curious, to question everything, and to be okay with the uncertainty that comes with thinking about these big philosophical questions.
Yeah, he's like the ultimate philosophical mentor, right? Urging us to dive headfirst into these mysteries, armed with our critical thinking skills and a healthy dose of skepticism.
And maybe a touch of humor, too,
Yeah.
Because, even though Bayle's writing deals with these really serious topics,
Right.
it's often witty and ironic.
He never takes himself too seriously, which I think is a good reminder for all of us who, get caught up in the weeds of philosophical thought sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to wrap things up, exploring Bayle is like this journey of self-discovery,
Yeah.
this chance to confront challenging ideas and maybe refine our own understanding of the world.
Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the fascinating and often enigmatic world of Pierre Bayle.
A thinker who challenged the norms of his time
Yeah.
and whose ideas continue to resonate even today.
We hope you're feeling intellectually stimulated and maybe even a little bit obsessed with Bayle now.
And who knows, maybe you'll be the one to finally crack the Bayle enigma.
Right. But even if you don't, the journey itself is worth it.
Yeah. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the spirit of philosophical inquiry alive.
Until next time, happy pondering. So, we were talking about Bayle and this idea that he was really focused on the limits of human knowledge.
Yeah, this idea of intellectual humility, right?
Right. And this leads us to what might be Bayle's most famous and most controversial contribution,
Okay, hit me with it.
the problem of evil.
Ah, right, the big one.
The big one. Yeah.
How can a benevolent, all-powerful God allow suffering?
Exactly. And this was central to a lot of Bayle's work. And his take was, well, let's just say it was pessimistic.
Okay, how so?
He argued there's just no rational solution to the problem of evil.
Really? None.
None. Like, no matter how hard we try to reconcile a perfect God with the fact that there is suffering in the world, we're going to run into contradictions.
So he's saying that any attempt to explain it away, like, through free will or saying suffering is part of God's plan, it's always going to fall short.
Right. He was really good at dismantling these traditional theodicies.
Theodicies, right? Those attempts to justify God.
Yeah, and he used these thought experiments, these arguments that are really insightful but also kind of unsettling.
I bet that got him in some hot water.
Oh, yeah. I mean, accusing God of being responsible for evil, that's not going to win you a lot of friends.
Not in the 17th century.
Definitely not.
So, but Bayle, he stuck to his guns, right?
Yeah.
He insisted that reason couldn't solve this dilemma.
He did. He argued we have to accept certain things on faith, like the existence of a perfect God, even if we can't understand how that squares with evil in the world.
So faith requires a certain amount of acceptance. Like, we have to be okay with not understanding everything.
Right, and that's where his critics, like Leclerc, came in and accused him of promoting blind faith, of abandoning reason.
So how did Bayle respond to that?
He had this interesting analogy. He said, look, there are lots of areas of human knowledge where we have to accept things we can't fully explain.
Give me an example.
He used the example of the continuum, like the infinite divisibility of space,
Okay.
which is full of these paradoxes, right? You start thinking about it too hard and your brain melts.
Yeah, it gets a little trippy.
So he's saying it's like that with the problem of evil.
Okay, so we're supposed to just accept that evil exists, even if we can't wrap our heads around why a perfect God would allow it.
Right. He's saying the problem of evil isn't a problem for faith. It's a problem for reason.
And that accepting that is actually a sign of intellectual honesty.
Exactly.
Okay, I think it's starting to get it. But it still all circles back to this Bayle enigma, right?
It always does.
Like, is he really a devout Christian, struggling to reconcile faith with reason? Or is there something else going on?
Yeah. Is he a skeptic? A fideist? A secret atheist? People are still debating this.
And I think that's part of what makes him so fascinating. We can't neatly categorize him.
His work is complex and often deliberately ambiguous.
He keeps us guessing.
He does, but before we get lost in the enigma of Bayle's personal beliefs, I think we should talk about his ideas on the nature of belief itself.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great transition because it's something that's really relevant to our audience, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we form our beliefs? What do we believe in? And why?
And Bayle's work offers some really valuable insights into those questions.
Yeah, it's not just some abstract philosophical exercise. It's dealing with something that I think all of us grapple with on some level.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Bayle goes beyond simply arguing for the right to believe whatever we want.
Okay.
He really digs into this connection between individual judgment, conscience, and the search for truth.
So it's not just about having the freedom to believe anything, but also the responsibility that comes with it, right?
Precisely. And Bayle was all about critical thinking. He believed that true belief had to be based on careful examination and real conviction, not just blind acceptance of authority.
Which is pretty radical for his time, given the power of religious institutions.
Yeah, he's basically saying each person has the ability and even the duty to figure out what's true for themselves.
And this brings us right back to the Bayle enigma, doesn't it?
It does.
Because we can't say for sure what Bayle himself believed. We're forced to engage with all these different interpretations of his work. and maybe even confront our own biases in the process.
Right. And it's almost like he's inviting us to participate in this ongoing debate,
Yeah.
to wrestle with these questions alongside him. He's not giving us easy answers. He's making us think critically and independently.
Which is what philosophy should do, right?
Exactly. And Bayle's work shows us how powerful philosophical inquiry can be.
Yeah.
He might not have had all the answers, but he asked the right questions.
And those questions are still relevant today.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about exploring his work.
Yeah.
You don't just come away with facts about Bayle.
Right.
You come away with a whole new set of questions, new ways of thinking about belief, conscience, the limits of reason, all of it.
He makes you think. He makes you challenge your own assumptions.
Exactly, and that's a valuable thing.
So what does all this mean for us? What can we take away from all this time we've spent with Pierre Bayle?
I think Bayle's legacy is this call to intellectual engagement.
Oh.
He's saying, be curious, question everything, be okay with uncertainty when it comes to these big questions.
He's like the philosophical mentor we all need.
Right, urging us to dive into these mysteries, to think critically, be skeptical.
And maybe with a little sense of humor too, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Bayle's writing, even when it's dealing with serious stuff, it often has this wit and irony.
He doesn't take himself too seriously, which I think is a good lesson for all of us.
Absolutely, because sometimes we get a little too caught up in the weeds.
Yeah, we need to remember to step back and not take ourselves too seriously.
So in the end, exploring Bayle's work, it's like this journey of self-discovery.
Right.
It's a chance to confront these challenging ideas and maybe refine our own understanding of the world.
Yeah, it's like with Bayle, it's not just about having those abstract philosophical debates. It's about how those connect to our lives. Yeah, and how we make sense of our place in the world.
Exactly, and Bayle was really ahead of his time in that sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He wasn't just arguing for, tolerance in a legal sense,
Right.
but he was really digging into the deeper implications of what it means to have freedom of conscience.
So it's not just about, having the right to believe whatever you want. It's also about like using that freedom responsibly.
Right, and Bayle was all about critical thinking.
Right.
He believed that, genuine belief had to be based on careful examination and genuine conviction, not just accepting what you're told.
Which is, that's a pretty radical idea for his time.
Oh, yeah, for sure, especially when you consider how powerful religious institutions were.
Right, exactly.
He was essentially saying that everyone has the ability and even the duty to figure out what's true for themselves.
And this takes us right back to the Bayle enigma, right?
Yeah.
Because we can't definitively say what Bayle himself believed.
Right.
We're kind of forced to grapple with these different interpretations of his work.
Yeah.
And maybe even confront our own biases along the way.
Right, and it's like he's intentionally drawing us into this debate.
Yeah.
He's not just giving us the answers. He's making us think for ourselves.
Which I think is what good philosophy does, right?
Exactly, and I think Bayle's work is a testament to how powerful and important that kind of philosophical inquiry can be.
Yeah.
He might not have had all the answers,
Right.
but he asked the right questions, and those questions are still relevant today.
Absolutely, and that's what I personally find so rewarding about reading Bayle.
Yeah.
Is that you don't just come away with a bunch of facts about some long dead philosopher.
Right.
You come away with a whole new set of questions to think about, new ways of thinking about belief and conscience and the limits of human reason.
And you come away thinking about yourself and your own beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very personal, introspective kind of philosophy.
Yeah, he makes you question your own assumptions.
So I guess the big question is, what can we take away from this deep dive into Pierre Bayle? What does it all mean for us today?
I think Bayle's legacy is a call to intellectual engagement,
Okay.
Like, be curious, question everything, and don't be afraid of the uncertainty that comes with trying to understand these big philosophical questions.
He's like that philosophical mentor we all need,
Yeah.
pushing us to dive headfirst into these mysteries, to think critically, to be skeptical.
And to have a sense of humor about it all.
Oh, yeah, because even when Bayle's dealing with these really serious topics,
Right.
he never takes himself too seriously.
He doesn't, and that's a good reminder for all of us, I think.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the weeds sometimes.
Exactly.
We need to remember to step back and not take ourselves too seriously.
So yeah, exploring Bayle's work it's a journey of self-discovery.
Yeah.
It's a chance to confront these challenging ideas and Maybe even, refine our own understanding of ourselves and the world.
It's like he's giving us the tools to think for ourselves,
Yeah.
which at the end of the day is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of Pierre Bayle.
This fascinating and enigmatic thinker who challenged the norms of his time and whose ideas still resonate today.
We hope you found this exploration thought-provoking, and maybe you're even a little bit obsessed with Bayle now.
Who knows, maybe one of you listening will be the one to finally crack the Bayle enigma.
Right, but even if you don't, the journey is well worth it.
So, as always, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep that spirit of philosophical inquiry alive.
And until next time, happy pondering.